Too exciting in the random events phase. Along with my kind of how do I cope with this game and deal with it, one of the things is I largely am ignoring the secret event chits. I hate chit pull systems though, and it's this annoying... I mean, it's okay when you're pulling one chit to see what something does and then you go do it or whatever, but here I'm pulling 10 chits, one for each country. Granted, that's a solo event here, but still you'd be passing the cup around. It's this obnoxious mechanical aspect of the game that I just really don't like. And then on top of that, whether or not they're in English, I have to look up so many of them if I want to pay attention. So it's kind of like, fuck it, I don't care enough about it. And that's part of why I want to walk away from the game. Of course, in order to do so, well, I don't know the rules to the next game I wanted to play. I'm slated to do something. I've got to stop taking things as review copies, which some companies are making easier on me. Yeah, apparently not everyone sees any value in the coverage that I do in terms of getting their games more exposure, which I can't really blame them. I got enough to do anyway. But yeah, unfortunately there's one that sought me out that I agreed to do, and I feel stuck in this in part because I'm having trouble coping with reading rules right now, or anything else in life, to tell you the truth. I don't know what the hell to do. Okay. So anyway, and another note that doesn't really have a lot to do with the story of the game, but like I said, I'm at the end of the last video, I'm using the Averio software to try to load things up. Man, the interface to that is just such shit. I've got to open and close the entire software again and again if I push a button wrong or something. It's just, it's so much easier to just pull the files directly off the camera, dump them where I want them, dump them into Movie Maker, but I'm hoping that I'll get some kind of performance advantage on my machine where I won't lose 20 minutes of my life using my computer. Test this out. It's actually, I've been kind of pulling myself away from the video game I've been playing, but to tell you the truth, to test this out, I need to actually be running the video game at the time while the movie is finally finishing in all of its stages, basically. So, whatever. I'm not absolutely certain of the legitimacy. Austria and Spain have declared a peace with Russia. If Austria alone could declare she's breaking her alliance with Poland and negotiate a separate peace. And that's the model I'm following here. Whether or not, because Spain has to sort of follow Austria because of the special thing. Question is whether Spain should have to pay any political cost for that. The way the rules are written, actually they couldn't do this as an alliance. Austria and Spain as an alliance, as part of the alliance, could have been 2 votes out of the 3 in the Polish alliance to say, hey, let's have a white peace and offer that to the Russians, which is exactly what happened between the two. In fact, I think Spain should not be charged. I don't know. They shouldn't be charged for the war either. So I just don't know. I'll leave it as it is. Anyway, if there was that kind of tripartite agreement to offer a white peace, and I'm sure Poland would have accepted it, then Russia would have the option of either accepting this 3-player alliance agreement, 3 players offering a white peace, or they could just refuse it. But because of the special circumstances surrounding Spain, it doesn't quite work. Anyway, that's where we are. I'm not doing anything else in the diplomacy phase. Targeting minors that people barely have a chance to get, it just seems so pointless, and I'm too tired to do pointless things, so we go to the economics. The economies of the nations that have big debts are really straining, like France with this pestilence. They had to drop some of their That was actually last turn it came about. I don't know how they ended up surviving. I probably miscounted. But they had to drop some of their units. Austria had to increase its debt, actually, and that's a nightmare situation. It had no option in this case. It actually could not meet its core obligation of paying off of its debt because of all the unrest that it has throughout its land. They really want to avoid wars from now on. They learned their lesson. Don't enter into a war when you're already on shaky ground. Now, see, that's a problem that you might not be in control of. For example, someone might decide they have some aims on France, and they may want to pick off the cripple. France can become very powerful. You could get decent points on beating up on a weak nation. So I could see that really skewing the game towards someone trying to gather points at this point. In particular, a country like Prussia, as we said, has interests in Poland. They want to recover their own war effort, though. They have a couple of their own little issues going on down there. So most of Europe is struggling. Something like Sweden is just hosed. They can't get anywhere. Basically, they have this army, whatever it is, and they can't grow it. And it's not big enough that they can really intervene anywhere on their own. That's fitting, actually. Sweden probably is a little too potent early in the game, although we never saw them really operating on their own, so maybe they can't. That's the real problem with the Great Northern War, is here they're facing Poland and Russia, and man, they, even at the height of their power, they probably don't have the kind of force pool and the economy to sustain that kind of war. Maybe with a lot of economic aid they would, but we're not going to see that. There doesn't seem to be, if there is any alliance that's to be formed, it's probably Holland saying, look, I can help out you weaker people. Maybe you can gain some ground on fighting against my enemies. I seem to have these perennial enemies of Prussia and England now, and Spain would have joined in too. If I could get an ally in that, or a couple allies, maybe something cool would happen. But there's no one with the navy to challenge the English in particular, and well, if Spain's involved in it, they're not an issue. So many times I bring up the issue of, what do you do if you're not winning a game? And that definitely comes to the forefront here, even at this very early point. It strikes me that people like France just don't have a real chance. So now their goal is what? Is their goal to pad their position and try to not come in last? Or is their goal maybe to try to end the game early? It's just a matter of what should people deserve, or should they try to take their revenge out on someone who pissed them off? Well, no one really pissed them off. Spain beat them fair and square. It was their own wars that they started, and they got their ass handed to them. So they're probably going to play reasonably and try to gain some position somehow. And maybe the best way of doing that is just try to rebuild the nation up to the point where it can win some wars. Or if it gets a nice opportunity to enter into a war that it thinks it can win, maybe it can become Holland's buddy. Who knows? Just to be an update on the Averio side of things, it's definitely significantly less memory intensive than Windows Movie Maker. I just wish I could figure out a way to use it to construct the movies without their full interface. I just want to yank videos down from my camera, dump them into a file, and then run something that I can just throw the movies in and name it myself and everything. All the interface, it gives me this stupid calendar, and I don't seem to have control over naming my movies, or I have some over where they go, I think, but I don't have too much control over where it places them, which is okay. I can get used to that, but it's just annoying. Rounds of combat definitely makes a significant difference, the enforce there. So the poles were broken here on the first round. They take a hit. Well, they would have routed in that case, but actually the biggie here was that they were facing a more powerful force by that point. And so Peter managed to wipe out. He actually wiped out two different forces there. These guys escaped from back here. Now, most of the Polish territory has fallen, or most of the Polish captured territory in Russia has fallen. So here's the problem. Russia, to some extent, may want to just take everything that they can from Poland. They may not want to slow down. Now, I don't know how many claims they have in Poland, but I think it's quite significant for probably no good reason. To indicate the later, divisions of Poland. Let's see, Wielka Moskwa. I don't know where that is. I think this is Russian territory. That's their hereditary. Minsk Berezina. That's Minsk. I think this is Brinsk. I don't know what the hell. This is Berezina there. They've already got that. So if they can hold Minsk, they can get that. All the Baltic states... Oh, no, sorry. These are disputed. All the Baltic states can be converted. I think they've captured this by now. I'm not sure. But that may be a principality, in which case... So goddamn much you have to look up in this game. Just constantly trying to see, hey, did they capture this yet? And no aids to help you. I should be using little counters to indicate how long somebody's been sitting somewhere. Well, we'll see. So indeed, the territory is Russian. It is able to be absorbed. It is a principality. And we see the Russians cleaning up Tver and grabbing what else they can. Now, here's the problem. If I interpret this that Poland can't just surrender, and we're done with the fall combat, essentially. If I interpret it as Poland can't just surrender and enforce that on Russia, the way that I've been saying, hey, I don't like how that works. Well, my worry is Russia can grab most of Poland by refusing the surrender. They can get, half the territories. Now, they can't really, because they don't have claim to half. And they're not going to want to spend continuous amounts of resources. But, I'm beginning to think the rules as written may actually work better, wherein someone can get out of a war. I don't know. I am just frozen by this, not sure which way I want to be able to go. Anyway, that'll probably be a decision for tomorrow. I'll finish up this year. In terms of getting the life phase, which is another pain in the ass, looking through the list of all the people who are going to die. You only have to check. Well, EU's got the same problem, but somehow because there's less military units on the board and such it's usually pretty easy to find them. And then when you actually need them, when you're actually starting a war, you look and you can see very clearly, oh, that guy shouldn't still be on the board, because they're nicely printed. Start date, end date in a very clear way. Here, I can't read what's on the counter. I'm still blowing hot and cold on this war issue, and it's preventing me from wanting to play at all. I think I have to make a decision, and I'm going to follow the rules. The deciding factor is not so much, geez, I really believe that someone has the ability to surrender under any conditions, basically, that they're losing a war, and that the gains of the victor will be proportionate to what's been gained then. In fact, I'm really kind of sold on the opposite of that. But I guess the biggest thing convincing me to go with the rules is I think it'll make the game faster. I just don't know. I'm going to put off making this decision. The problem is kind of twofold. One is what I've expressed, which is that these wars had a difficult time coming to an end at times. But the other has to do with there's nothing to really enforce and push a victor to taking a piece. Yet you get the feeling that war weariness and such things could have influenced it. But honestly, I think that's a pretty minor factor at this day and age. I mean, certainly some of these wars did end due to war weariness, but they ended to the kind of war weariness that you're going to see in any war with these things showing up. So this is the question Russia has, is how much more can they gain by dragging it out another turn? Or would they be better off taking their victory now and building on that? They'd be stripping territories away from the Poles. They'd be getting rid of the randomness. So I really do think that I was doing the right thing by saying, let's get rid of the rules as written. The person accepting the peace can demand, no, I will not. The person being surrendered to can demand, no, I will not accept a limited surrender. I want to play this out a little further. The problem that I have is that they should suffer a penalty in prestige from that. I think that would handle the whole situation. And should both people, well, that's kind of the implied design of the game. I feel like the person being surrendered to should suffer the greater penalty. So maybe we're talking a 4-2 or something. I don't know. So an interesting situation over here in the economic, the merchant side of things. The Dutch made enough money to pay their triple. And, last turn, I think I must have miscounted. Any game that has this amount of calculation in it, but doesn't provide you with sort of spreadsheets, I'm very likely to... Basically, it's a matter of... it doesn't seem that serious. So I'm just kind of counting in my head and whatever. And basically my feeling is, if it's not providing you with spreadsheets and stuff like that to aid you in the calculations, it doesn't really matter. And, in this case, probably doesn't matter that much. To make a mistake. But I probably missed some of my production last turn for the Dutch, because they just didn't have a lot of money. Anyway, the fact of the matter is they had enough to go the 3 times this time, and there's 2 responses to that. So far in this game, I've been not taking the response of, I can pay triple to avoid being penalized if I have that cash. England did it this time, and it actually worked out kind of nicely for them because Spain did not. And it's going to probably force everyone to always pay triple now, when it looks like the Dutch can do that. Other people who pay triple dividends don't get any benefit out of it. They don't get to do high competition or whatever. But they're protected from the high competition, which is the big effect there. The other use of the money that you could be using for this is you could pump it into building new ships, which is what the Spanish tried to do. And it looks like they succeeded. The odds of a new ship are actually better than the chance of losing a ship. So if you spend the money on a new ship, you have a slightly better chance than if you spend the money to try to protect your investment. But the reason the English choice isn't bad is because the English have a smaller commercial structure than the Spanish do after building that ship. So now the Spaniards paid less than the English did, although they have a larger structure. Therefore, the English got prestige off of it, and the Spanish lost prestige. Now, the net, because the Spanish paid double, is they stay even. But we have major gains by both the Dutch and English. And we can see, the Dutch are not getting that hurt by these regular wars. That's frustrating. It feels like you should be able to get a grip on people. Maybe if they couldn't surrender, right? Nah, it wouldn't make that big a difference. It would just give a chance of freezing them in place. All right, well, I decided the Poles are going to surrender and Russia's going to accept it. With that 4-2 in place penalty, with the majority of the penalty going to the Russians if they don't accept the peace, just a simple surrender, that's a significant, perhaps about as significant as any imposition as you can make on them to accept a peace. Now, what they're offering, though, it starts to get things tricky. So, for one thing, there's a lot of territory under Russian control. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 provinces. This has already been conquered, so it's gone. That means I get 5 big demands, which is what you get in a enforced, constrained peace. You might get more on a country like Poland if you take more of their territory, or whatever. It also means that 4 provinces change hands. Well, what provinces can I take? All right, I got problems. First of all, Pripyat, Minsk, something Orly, and some other place is what constitutes Lithuania. If I can find it. Oh, jeez. I had it somewhere. God, this shit is so... here. Here's their claim. Lithuania, Orly, Minsk, and Pripyat. But then down here, Minsk and Berenzia are considered Lithuania East. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. And I think this is Berenzia because this is something else. Bryansk or something. I've got no claims that I can tell to the Ukraine, but I don't know, because I did hold it, but I don't think I have one to Bryansk, because I never had that. Trying to figure out if I've got any right to take something is just such a bitch in this game. And, there's just, the game is made up of all kinds of stupid little lists, here, there, and everywhere, and there's no single one that's useful in any single condition. It's like when I'm looking up the economics, I'm on 4 different pages trying to find out what I have to fucking do. Here, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to probably have to read significant portions of the rules again to try to find, or at least skim through, to try to find the goddamn sections that might pertain to this, and then try to figure out what the hell the designer actually meant out of it all. And, it ain't worth it. Too much of a damn headache to figure out, because I realized one thing. I'm playing something that's not the Grand Campaign. Now, the game suggests that you can do this, but the rules obviously aren't designed for it. This particular province is the one I have the least understanding of what to do with. I gave Russia the right to claim that, as though they had once owned it. They once owned the Ukraine and have claim to it. They have claim to Smolensk. This particular province, I think they're supposed to have claim to, but it just never shows up. Maybe it was somewhere, I don't know. Maybe in the scenario. But the restriction that they can't take a principality, such as the Baltic, without taking the whole thing, or Lithuania. Now, of course, some of that, the whole thing, they already own, so presumably they could never take it because it's split between the two countries as the rules are written. But assuming that you say, well, they can take, if they can take everything of the principality from the country in question, fine. And they could take the Baltic because it's disputed one by one and some of the Lithuanian territories. But the fact that they do not have whatever Orly here is means they can't take any of the territory in Lithuania. They don't have claim to this. Yeah, this is B something or another. That's how I started to write it down because I was trying to make a peace treaty. And they don't have K something, I think. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's not Latvia, it's K something. The map is unreadable. Okay, and therefore translating things over to the text is difficult. So anyway, all they could take in a demand would be Ukrainia, B something, and Podolia. All right, well, that adds up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 prestige. Russia realizes I can force the Poles to refuse the peace by taking, as my next demand say, a major prestige demand, which would be 5 more prestige. The Poles can't accept that. They're not allowed to. Given that they have a way to not drop below 5, and in this case they refused it, I only made 2 demands, which is far less than I needed to, so the refusal reverses or inverts who gets the bigger penalty. So now the Poles get the 4-point penalty, the Russians get the 2-point penalty. That's reflected here in the temporary penalties, but it's also reflected over here, and we get to continue the war. Whee! Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Who the fuck knows? I don't even know if I'm through the diplomacy phase, but, you know, this is how much fun I'm having at this point. And I don't know if... I think the only thing that I'd have fun with now are the kind of simple things that I was kind of hoping to avoid while I'm out of work. But I'm just becoming so disassociated and so disgusted with my life that I'm unable to really concentrate on games. It suffers from a factor that's psychological for me that happens in a lot of games. As I'm doing my economic phase, I realize, you know, I'm essentially selecting my regiments at random and where they set up. I just can't be bothered to read every unit, and especially to try to figure out where they all are. When I have piles and piles of units and where they all set up, I have to make too big a decision for the kind I like. And so much of this game is that kind of stuff. Just these piddly little things that maybe actually, you know, improve some realism design or something, but in actual play, when I face it at least, it means, well, fuck realism. We're getting random setup which province I build a unit in, you know. However you want to look at that, that bothers me. When a game gets too mechanically, or in this case mentally mechanically, because I'm at the same time trying to juggle 3 numbers in my head to figure out how much money I have. You know, I have to look at my tax number, start subtracting off that, then count the number of units that I have on the board. All of this could be done on a spreadsheet in a much, much better fashion. The problem, of course, well, it's done by the regiment, so each regiment on the board would have to be individually tracked, and that's going to be a pain in the ass too. There's no easy way of keeping track of an actual count of a lot of different pieces. It's going to be an annoyance in play no matter what. And the fact that this game, unlike, say, EU, which has lots and lots of overhead, but all that overhead's kind of easy to assume, and you know, in terms of it's all on paperwork and stuff. This one, there's just no way around it. The obnoxious thing in EU is maybe keeping track of, you know, each country has a couple of leaders, which ones might be dying at any particular time, but they're easy to find. Here, It's hard to find the dates. You have to look in the rules or in here because the counters are useless. All right, at the end of spring, and again, I can't keep track of, when things fell and when they didn't. I'm trying to do my best to guess, but that's the best I can do without some sort of device. The Poles pushed forward against Peter. Took some heavy losses through attrition and said, I'm not as big as he is, I'm not going to attack. But size of his stack is really deceptive in this game. Peter's stack actually has 3 leaders and 3 artillery in it. So it was a smaller force. Peter ends up attacking anyway, and he wins the battle because of quality of units. 2 rounds of battle, as I'm trying to remember to do now. Meanwhile, the Russians have advanced and taken enough that they're happy at this point with the peace they would get, I think. They're at 1, 2. I swear I took Podolia. I was considering it in the peace. Now, I may have moved this. I don't know. Well, I guess I lost it. I'm not sure if that fortress was paid for or not anyway. So I think it wasn't, but damned if I know for sure. Because if Poland had money, they would have paid for it. No, because they would have built armies. Okay, so they didn't pay for it. Trying to guess. Anyway, Podolia was one of the things I thought I could get, but apparently not unless I bumped or moved this. Which may well have happened. There's enough provinces, though, I think. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not this, 7, 8 provinces at this point. That's going to give, I think, 5 peace choices. Shit, I don't remember. I don't know if that gives 5 peace choices or 5 territories. I think it only gives 4 territories. And hell, I may have wanted to claim something. I'm not sure what I can take. But one of the biggies is, one of those territories is Lithuania, which is, actually, that doesn't count. So I can't count these as 4 territories. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I've got 5 territories because the Baltics also only counts as 1, I guess. So I can only take 4 demands and 3 territories or something like that. And maybe I'll remember that, or maybe I'm wrong, and I'll find out differently by the time the peace actually rolls around or whatever. But it looks pretty damn bad for Poland. It was fairly evenly matched until things kind of broke, and at that point Austria had already made their decision to get out of the game. Right, well, here we are in 1707, and at this point the Poles will not be able to avoid a peace. Not that they wanted to. They wanted the peace, but the Russians were able to engineer such a peace that they could not sign it. As the turn winds down, we have one thing. The Turks have a new ruler, Mohammed I. Now, he's a minor until 1711, assuming that 15 years is correct. I just don't want to bother looking things up anymore. It's just too much damn work. And it's not like I'm remembering. When a rule book's poorly organized, when it doesn't sink into me. And I think anything that comes in loose leaf, unbound, I don't care if you put any report covers or anything on it, it's not going to do it for me, I don't think. It's just not as sufficient. It just degrades my experience of the game tremendously. To have a pile of loose leaf paper I got to deal with. And whether I bind it or not, whatever, the AWE stuff is crappy enough to begin with, but I take a certain pleasure in flipping through the pages, etc. This, it just gives me a fucking headache, and that's what the whole game's been doing. It's why I don't print out rules ever, why I can't stand living rules. And it's a pity, but I think this game has a lot of problems even without that aspect. The 07 event phase, we had inflation in Poland and famine in Austria. Inflation's not that big a deal, except that Poland's even more, in trouble in terms of the current war, but they're going to not be able to spend money. Inflation just adds to the cost of building units. And Poland's going to be in a lot of trouble after this. The commercial side of things, the Dutch didn't do so well this time. They ended up only being able to pay 2, but they did have the extra cash, therefore, to build their final merchant fleet. They're up to, I think, a 15 structure. They can't get any bigger. This is the share of, the economy that they're going to get. And online next turn, we'll have the Spanish ship that was built last turn. Everybody went forward 1 space except the Dutch, who went 2. So we've got kind of, that usual point spread. Taxes going into Russia and Sweden. The feeling there being the only way to get ahead in this game seems to be to have a merchant fleet, or at least the best way to get ahead. Well, that's not really fair, but it is a way to pad your prestige points. Russia can afford it. I'm not so sure Sweden can. They're unable to build an army because of that extra buck that they're diverting each turn into their treasury. Basically, right now, they could build 1 more unit. And they have a few more units left, I think. I'll have to check all the armies. I'll do it after the peace because Poland's going to lose a big chunk of territory. Certainly all of Lithuania, all 4 spaces of that. Poland's just going to be wiped down to almost nothing. They're going to lose the Baltic. That's 2 provinces, right? They're going to lose about 2 more. Podolia has fallen. What else is available to take? Probably nothing. I think that's so they're going to lose 3 provinces, but 2 of those provinces are actually full principalities, as it were. And Russia's just going to be huge. Now that's going to be kind of scary. The rest of the world is going to feel kind of pressured by Russia at that point. Historically, Russia didn't expand this deep into Poland as they're going to until the division of Poland, the partition, which really, everybody kind of agreed to who was over there. Everybody's not too happy about this situation, so you might actually see a resurgence of Poland with an alliance there. We want to see how the points fall out. Prussia certainly isn't going to declare war on Poland right away. And the question is what to do about Holland, of course, because they're sitting here still way ahead in points. 530. Next competitor, I think, is around 470. That's England, 474. Why should Prussia really help England necessarily? Maybe playing for second at this point is the best move, or trying to form a continental alliance against both the seafaring powers, or whatever. It's hard to tell, but it feels like whatever we're doing here against Holland isn't really furthering Prussia's goals. It definitely is helping England catch up a little bit. This piece is essentially enforced. Now, looking at the optional rules again or the suggested errata, to take a look if they would have helped. Is there any reason Poland wanted to keep fighting this war? No, they wanted out of it last turn, right? They have no army and basically would have been overrun completely. Could the conditions have been less? Conceivably. At this point, we were at 5 picks, which is what an unconditional surrender gives, the enforced peace. And we were at 4 territories granted. It would have gone to 5 territories granted otherwise, which would have meant Podolia as well. That didn't get captured. What we had was the Ukraine and Bryansk or whatever, all of Lithuania, and then all of the Baltic states were converted. Now, if those were not counted as principalities, we would have had more picks. So it would have worked out so that we could take the provinces anyway, probably, or at least most of them. This creates a humongous Russia. Production-wise, Russia's at 20 plus 2, which makes them bigger than anyone on the board except France in terms of income, but they don't have the huge public debt that France has, which is keeping France out of the game. So the only other country with an income that's comparable right now is, well, actually both Spain and England have comparable incomes. And you could say Holland almost does, but they don't have an army or a navy that they can really build up. Unlike Spain and England, though, Russia can build 5 units per turn. They have this humongous manpower. So they are truly the giant in the game at this point. They also have a bigger army now. It's not that much bigger. They had most of the units. They gained a couple of units. The biggie probably is the Baltic state units that they gained. Their borders are all held by very weak powers now. Turkey is probably the strongest of the pile, but tottering, unable to really grow its forces with what it looks like a $30 public debt there. I erased the zero somehow a little bit, which is a really, taxing event on their economy. Poland is absolutely wrecked. What did they take other than the provinces? They took a major financial claim, which means Poland's going to owe $12 over the next 3 years. They only have a $6 income now. Poland is just wrecked. They also don't have much in the way of an army. This is all they've got, and their feudal, once mighty feudal forces have been diminished as well. And then finally Sweden, who's been completely handcuffed. And by pursuing the attempt to get a trading company up, I think have made themselves completely unimportant as a military power, which means Russia can grab Finland if they so desire. They've also changed the commercial strategies. Commerce. This has already gone into the Russian taxation, but we've got this wood also going there. So, all right, it wasn't as big as I thought it would be because the cereal here is over in Pomerania, or Posen, or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, it is going to shift some of the finances a little bit, perhaps. I really doubt that this is going to be contested. Somebody else probably willing to go in there for 3, but contested at 1.5, there are better places to go. There are 2-point places still left. So somebody's going to pull out of there. That's going to up their taxation. Instead of getting $1 a turn, they'll get $2 a turn. Someday soon, they'll have their own commerce fleet, maybe. They'll also probably start building their own navy if they can, because that's kind of a weak spot that they have. The problem with that is, of course, until it gets big, and it takes a long time to build up a big navy. I don't know how big it can get. It can get pretty big, I assume. Until it gets reasonably large, they can't really play on the world stage as a naval power. Anyway, this phase has been kind of exciting. I don't think I'm doing anything else. Oh, yeah, one more thing. They took a political demand. They took Saxony away from the Poles. So now they have an interest over in Germany, which, with the ability to cross Poland, etc., they can become a real player in the continent finally. This is something that did not happen in Peter the Great's time. So Russia's well ahead. What is this, damn garbage trucks? Well ahead of their historical pace. In fact, they're so far ahead that the game doesn't really give them much more to do. Other than Podelsia and Finland, anything else that they're going to add is going to be largely them buying a claim and working their way into something. My guess is that, well, see, here's the thing. The way the game is structured, the way the victory points occur, unless you go commercial, the only way to keep your prestige up is to keep winning wars, to go Napoleon all over the place. Whether or not they want to buy more territory is a questionable thing. They can strip things away from their neighbors and take away their neighbors' ability to fight by doing so. And finally, the prestige. Well, course, Poland drops all the way down, but they're able to save themselves. In fact, they dropped way below this. I don't know what to do here. Do they stop at 0, or does the negative get performed and then what gets bumped? I'm going to stop them at 0, not give them an additional penalty, bump them up to 7. Russia can't gain anymore. Not only are they at the top of the chart, but anything over 15 would be disallowed. And they kind of knew they weren't going to get back the points they were spending. They were going to be at the top of the chart for a while. And, well, it's going to be kind of a quick turn after this, other than the economic side of things. Everything else is, just going to be moving units back. Not that the military phase is ever very difficult to play out. All right, so we finished up 1707. Not a lot happened. One thing I wanted to do that I forgot to was kind of trace the Russian border. In fact, I'll trace all the national borders at this point, just at least where there's some interest going on. So the Russians through here, down through the Baltics, over here through Lithuania, and then down here. Very much close to what Russia achieves at its height. Not much more left to get. Podolzia, which I think they had that by the end. Yeah, they had that by the end of the century. Okay, let's look at the Turkish border, cutting across here. I like to. When I used to do EU, I used to make little colored maps of the game as it went at the end of each period. That was really an exciting and happy thing for me. I no longer do anything like that. I'm just not that cool anymore, I guess. Poland really diminished, obviously. We've seen the Russian border of Poland cutting through here. And then the rest is really just the colored border with East Prussia over here. Prussia. It looks like there's Prussian troops in Hanover. Let me get those out of there. They're just artillery, and I meant to move them. The Prussian line on the Polish side, then here along Saxony, up, of course, and across to get Schleswig. And then over here on the other side of Hanover, they have Cleves and Oldenburg. Spain still holds all of Flanders and Franche-Comté, most of their Burgundian inheritance. And then elsewhere, they hold everything that they had. They hold the Italian states here, they hold Naples, and they hold, of course, all of Spain. I guess that's really about it. The fact that France hasn't been able to grow, that they were stymied early, the fact that Russia looks like an unbound creature, but in some sense, it's hard to tell, how big a threat is Russia, because you also have to worry about the victory point situation. So Russia's only at 405, without a trading company and without much opportunity to expand, except by beating up on their neighbors continuously. Of course, beating up on your neighbors may cost you something because you have to pay to grab a claim to something, then you have to pay to declare war unless you get an event, and then you have to beat them up, which they should be capable of doing with their size of an army. There's not a lot in the game to really oppose that, Russia's going to gobble up their neighbors. They're not going to get any stronger by doing so. The only thing that, except economically, which doesn't matter too much. I actually like that factor in the game. So, I've alluded to this before. Not using E there. That, not that my pronunciation can ever be really tracked very well, that the economies in a game, maybe not so much in Empires in Arms, where it is a military-based game, but in a game like EU, it feels like you have too much association between what should be private and public interests. The colonization, in some cases, was public, and this game kind of separates that. However, it doesn't handle the colonization, etc., directly. It handles the economics of the traders in a better way. The one thing that I'd say is kind of negative about it, and that maybe I appreciate more in EU, is you don't get to tax your own trading company. You only get to tax your trade by putting tariffs. On the other hand, the possibility of actually directly taxing the trading companies was something that existed, and it hindered some of the trading companies. I feel like there should be an additional layer in there. Usually you don't need additional cash, but I could see a country like Sweden or France, now they don't have trading companies anymore, wanting to eke out a little bit extra cash and putting a bit of a penalty on their trading company. That would be something that would be very hard to step back from. You'd have to pay a prestige cost or whatever to increase or decrease your taxation on your trading companies. But it might allow you just that little extra add. Because, for example, France's income is not really sufficient. Because of the pensions that they have in play, they're able to build like 1 unit a turn. Other countries are just strapped completely. And you'd imagine that the crown would make some sort of movement towards getting more money. What would that do? God knows. You know, the game is not quite the complex model to really facilitate some of the things that it seems to be reaching towards. I could see taking a game in this direction of a more realistic, yet still abstracted, but realistic in the sense that the government doesn't control everything, which is part of why it's abstracted, view of the economies of the empires. But going into, by which I mean more realistic, by allowing certain levers to be explored more carefully. For example, taxation on the companies themselves, raising taxes on the populace in non-wartime. Yet, you know, allowing that to cause real crises within the countries. It would be a complex game. This is already a fairly complicated game, although I think made far more so by the organization of the rules. But, you know, I mean, it's a, 50-page rule book plus, well, that's including most of the annexes, but plus scenarios and some special rules that aren't easily constructed there. And they didn't do a terribly good job of putting it together in a coherent manner. So, what would we be talking about? I'm not sure exactly, but I can see that this game kind of points in that direction. Anyway, I want to put a thanks out to everybody who's still watching. I kind of get the feeling that nobody would be watching for the sake of the game anymore. This is just kind of a, you know, I like hanging out with this guy. You guys are kind of like the friends that I have not met. If you can put up with me through all my cussing and complaining through the games and my coping with them, wow, you know, we should be gaming together. Anyway, up it goes. So, did the random events phase and had some thoughts here. I'm in the beginning of the 1708, which is going to be a peace turn. We don't know how long yet. There is one nice thing about the way the chits work in this game. They do provide something that I really like, which is players have control over events that maybe players could have control over. So, well, in some cases, things like you know, scorched earth or the ability to cancel an event played against you because of control of the cabinet in that case. Here, a choice of a frontier cast a spell. These things make sense. This harkens back to the kind of event cards that you had in the first game that I can think of having this. You know, I can think of a couple actually, but the first one that really follows this procedure properly is Empires of the Middle Ages, where you have, you know, events that the player can hold and events that are more just forced to come out. Unfortunately, that game doesn't have a clear marker on them. One of the advantages of chits, much as I dislike the chit pull mechanism, one of the advantages of chits is that you have this clear marker on them. You can't see what you're drawing, but once it's drawn, it's obvious you can't hold on to that secretly. And that would work very well in a multiplayer situation. The cards, to me, worked a little better in the solo game. Just because I'm not going to cheat, you know. But I could see some worry of that in some gaming groups. I've played with groups where there's cheating. A prior game, I think that was prior, that had this sort of mechanism was, let's see if we can find it, somewhere over here, SPI's War of the Rings, another SPI game from that era, where they were investigating, different ways of playing. That also had cards. Those, though, all the events were kind of like CDG type events. You held them and used them to your own purpose. Now, that makes sense there because you've got wizards and, Sauron and all that, who might actually control these things to some extent. But in a historical game, I don't think that applies well. Anyway, what you manage to do is get this nice mix, which CDGs fail completely to have, usually. One exception. CDG that manages to do it, but they manage to do it by breaking the paradigm, is Clash of Monarchs up there, which has a random events table and player-controlled events similar to this baked into the CDG cards, which makes a lot more sense. Some games also have kind of these public must-play cards in them. I think... Here I Stand is one of those, if I can find that over here. That kind of design where you pull a card and it says, you've got to do something with this. Again, that's got the problem of not being... I don't remember if those have markings on the back, but there's something kind of weird when you see one of those coming up, you're going to get screwed out of a card if that's the case. The chip pull works better there. Anyway. That's one thing that the chip pull does well. And obviously, if the events tables were printed out on separate player sheets, as they were in the original, but with just one, it would alleviate some of the problems of the lookup situation. But it's still kind of annoying to have to look up something that's fairly simple that could have been presented on a card easily enough. Just... a hard design decision there. But anyway, I'm babbling and investigating this game so much because I've got this repugnance to it. There's so much that I really dislike about it, but I don't think they're fundamental things. I think they're more problematic design decisions that there really wasn't necessarily a good answer to. For example, the counters with their province on them. I think there's a real strong case to be made for that, but boy does it make choosing what you're going to put on the board a difficult decision. And in most cases, it doesn't really matter where you put it. I mean, it doesn't really matter which unit you build, because in a peace turn, for example, or a turn without war, you have time to kind of assemble your regiments. It's more important during the war turns, but even then, maybe not so much. So, for example, with the Russians, they were able to kind of build at random because it didn't matter too much. They could then bring their forces forward. And I guess, if you're playing a multiplayer, the effort you put in, you have to make that decision. How much do I want to think about all my units? If I'm playing Russia with this huge horde of units, chances are a random selection is going to actually do me pretty good as long as I have the advantage in the war. But if I don't, maybe I have to put a little bit more effort in to make sure I get the right units. Playing solitaire, that's harder. It's harder to put that little bit more effort in for any given power, even when you know it might be important for it to do so. All right, on to the fun of the commerce phase. Nothing exciting happened here in the commerce phase. Pretty much what you'd expect. Everybody paid out double. The Dutch share seems to be going down somehow. I'm having trouble finding out just how. Maybe on the big turns they either saved money the turn before or they ran the table. Or maybe I miscounted. Who knows? Anyway, the only real goal that's coming out of the economics right now, England's looking towards, geez, if I could get Quebec here, I get control of another thing under my exclusive with the wood, and that would be appealing. On the other hand, maybe I want to move to free trade to avoid the colonies, but that's a random thing that could happen anytime after the Edict of Nantes, which we've had already. And as one of the best ways of preventing it from happening is constant war. Constant war is one of my goals right now because I'm facing the Dutch, so I'll probably go ahead with it, leaving things as I did this turn. At this point, Prussia's beginning to kind of have... they feel like they're being dragged into this war, this continuous state of war, with little gain for themselves, but little opportunity to break away from it, given that Holland is so far ahead at 548. The real question is, what can Prussia really gain? Can they maybe turn the English towards... I'm a little worried about Russia right now. They're pretty potent. Can we, cooperate to oppose them? Well, how's Poland doing? Poland's doing still better than we are. All right, we'll go ahead with one more war. And for everyone else, Spain doesn't want to do a preemptive war against France. It may not work. On top of that, they've got the danger of the Austrian situation. And who knows what will happen from a war. Turkey may join in. Maybe not on the first turn, but they have the ability to ally with France and come in later on a die roll. Likewise, a country like Poland might be able to recover better than poor Austria has been seeming to do so, although they're in a lot of trouble. Turkey this turn has a famine, so they're not going anywhere. Pretty much most of the countries are in recovery mode. Even Russia wants to consolidate their new territories and get rid of some of the unrest that they have. And they might do it this turn automatically, but they see no reason to enter a war. For France, they're too weak. They are weaker than Spain right now. They have to get that national debt down because if they start a war, they're going to start losing territories in terms of the unrest value, and an income that's barely sufficient to keep them going right now is not going to keep them going. And they want to get rid of those damn pensions. Those pensions are killing them. One way to do that would be to declare free trade. They might do that. They kind of like the taxation because they kind of like the taxation they have because they have this opportunity to start a shipping company, but nobody's coming into their territory anyway. Spain had the thought of doing so. This was an opportune location compared to some of the things they went for. For example, not the wood there, but they got themselves involved in a competition somewhere, the art here. The cereal will pay just as much, but they don't, on average, it'll actually pay more on average. But what they don't want to do, and each nation has its own needs for shipping, so that doesn't mean it's valuable to other people. What they didn't want to do was give France more money. They're worried about France, so they actually downgraded their shipping to a less valuable location based on that. Anyway, once again, we're going to see the attempt to get into Holland. Nobody's got a free casus belli for this, and the Prussians are saying, look, England, this is, this war helps you the most. You're the one who has the casus belli. You're the one who's going to have to declare a war each time. But I guess I'll support you this time. I think we're going to see that war come about. Nobody's got commercial reason for war. There is a frontier casus belli. If England could buy that from Poland by some means for the Prussians, then this could be a free casus belli. What can England give to Poland, though? An alliance? Maybe. All right. Well, First came the neutrality phase, and Bavaria ended up disassociating from Holland. Also had a disassociation of Baden, which I believe was also pro-Dutch, thereby weakening their hold on things. Both they and the English spent big money. The Dutch 7, the English, seeing the Dutch $7, spent the full 8 on getting Bavaria, and they got it. I'm playing with open money. It is all trackable, therefore I figure knowing the money makes for some interesting fashions here. That makes the Dutch an easier target, obviously. The English are do go with the declaration of war. They made the deal with Poland. Prussia was very much in favor of this because they see a threat from Russia that they do not see from Poland. Although Poland has decent point value, they're going to be in the front line of any war with Russia. England's a little reticent about the possibility of a war with Russia, but Prussia was already somewhat pushing for this out of their own fears. So if they want to keep the Prussian alliance happy, they had to do it. They also played so that declaration of war ended up having to be paid for, though. The Prussians picked up the chit, but they didn't get it off. They had to roll a 2 or better to do so. So then the English, with their claim on Zealand, played it. The English also obtained Hanover as a full possession at this point, which reduces, well, it's about even what the forces end up, but it reduces the free forces that Hanover ends up providing to the English. So now they actually have to build Hanoverian forces, and then they also have a mercenary unit somewhere here, the King's Legion, which I guess comes into play. Yeah, I think that's actually a normal Hanoverian unit. So they lost 1 unit and the artillery. Overall, not a good deal in terms of the war effort, but they can ship forces into there. No one else wants the war. The Poles are only in it to gain some sort of peace condition, essentially, as they're hoping to tag along in the victory, and the cost was that chit that they got. The fact that the chit didn't work doesn't really affect any deal that they have. I forgot to check so far to see what miners are going to be involved. No one else is interested in a war at this point. This time the English are going to ship troops into Hanover or into the Prussian territory before the war actually starts. All right, well, we had something we haven't seen yet. A fairly large jump in time. 11 years, not the biggest it can be. It's going to be 1719 turn for this next turn. That means all the unrest is cleared up, but the structural problems for the countries that were having trouble, that all is still there. There's no way of fixing that easily in a single turn. I forgot to... Shit. Alright, I gotta go back. I forgot to deal with the prestige trade for debt, which some countries definitely want to do. Normally I would say, the hell with it, but it's too big a thing. I'll be back. But discombobulating myself. Alright. What we had was some people paid the big 5 this turn, biting the bullet. Austria, France, they feel like they haven't been able to play because of their huge debts. Other countries pretty much paid 1, and I've reflected that we had period victory conditions, which are the squares in here. However, I've got corrections to those where I couldn't really read terribly well. Holland's still in the lead at 566. Now I've got a square there because I had thought, so Flanders is this situation where they and Britain get points if Flanders is Austrian. And actually I was looking in the wrong section. I was looking where it was still the prior period. Anyway, I made an error. But I wanted to point out that I had made the decision earlier that I had decided to go with the strict ruling of that because Spain is potent in this game. Spain is not... the earlier period, I believe, said Austria or Spain. in this period, well, the historical was going to be Austria, but my feeling here is that Spain is potent enough that the desire to maintain that Spanish, or non-French, shouldn't really give an advantage to the Brits and the Dutch. Hard to call there. They were supporting a fairly strong Spain against France at certain times, say League of Augsburg, etc. So I'm kind of mixed on that, but my feeling is France is not a threat in this game, so I don't want to give them points for preventing it from being just French. Austria is disconnected enough that that's okay. Notably, it's not a value for Holland to get it. But at this point, Holland would actually get an advantage out of owning it in the sense that, well, at least it's not doing them any good by being Spanish. The only way it would help them is if it somehow became Austrian. Anyway, so they've got some incentive to try to take it. Not that they're going to act on that. What did we get for points here? Russia got points for St. Petersburg and for taking the Crimea. Austria got points for something. Oh, for the Spanish inheritance. Spain got points for holding all the territories they were interested in. And this is notable. In this scenario, if Spain does hold this was, I think, the Spanish succession scenario. If Spain does somehow hold on to all their territory, France and Austria and England do not get their advantage there. So that is of some note here, which is one reason to say, we weren't really in favor of a Spain that remains powerful. We wanted to see them broken down a bit. Let's see who else we've got here. Turkey got points. Turkey got points off of holding part of Hungary. Anyway, though, by Austria and France taking big hits in points to try to clear out their war debt, and to some extent they succeeded. Austria is down to 45 and France is at 55. That'll help. That's a couple bucks a turn that they get now. But, it's not something that's going to be able to, turn around their chances of winning the game. What it does do is let them play the game, though. They haven't been able to play because they've just been so stripped. And to tell you the truth, even if it ends up that they lose prestige overall by playing, it's more fun to play than not, right? Of course, from my point of view, the game will pass quicker if they can't play. Oh well. And that'll put us into the beginning of 1719. Interesting thing here, we've got a number of new leaders starting to come in the 20s. We got one come in here in Spain. Marlborough's almost gone. He's played almost no role in this game. He was involved in maybe one battle. I don't even think he was in a battle. He was involved in a war down here against Holland, but I don't think he actually was used. And that's kind of the thing. There's no great wars going on. There's just this constant picking on Holland to try to drive them down. Before we go much further, we have to look at scenario 5. I don't know what Retour is. Return of Spain? I don't know. Resurgence. We have some special rules that I'm not sure what to do with here. I'll ignore some of these, which don't really matter, their status. But in particular, there's one here. England is in some competition of commerce with Holland, and this continues for the rest of the game, where England has some advantage in the commercial situation. I'm not willing to accept that. Rule 15.4, which this refers to, it doesn't seem to cover this. The core rules, I think, are what I have to go by, although I may allow, once the Dutch fall below the top level, the English to get a point of that. That's what this seems to imply, and it goes on in later scenarios, if I remember. It's not going to be that big a deal. I don't think the Dutch are ever going to lose commercial dominance. There's just no way of eliminating the enemy's trading fleet capacity except through competition, and it just doesn't exist here. Okay. Now, when we look at the victory conditions for this era, these get kind of interesting too, where I have to tweak them based on situation. Spain's going to get points for controlling all of its areas, including things like Gibraltar and the Baleares. Well, they have all of these, so they've got boatloads of points coming in. And everybody's got to kind of worry a little bit about Spain maintaining its position. It's at 489 points, which isn't in the top tier, but it's also, with all those advantages, above things like England, which is, your second-rated country at 506, right? Yeah, because the Dutch are at 566. That brings things into a little more focus. Countries like Spain do have a chance in this if we give them that kind of the victory conditions from the eras, and they're doing well. Spain also is going to get points from Austria if it gets a prestige piece from them. Okay, this doesn't make sense. So we've got a Habsburg on the throne. The French, the original situation was, okay, well, there would be a Bourbon on the throne, and France, the Bourbon king in Spain had to be recognized by the Habsburgs as being legitimate in Spain. And then there's a countervention for that. If Austria gets the prestige advantage, then they get the bonus, and that's supposed to be acceptance of the Treaty of Utrecht, where I'm not sure which conditions that they're particularly accepting of, but perhaps the Dutch, the Flanders locations that went over to their hand, along with some other things. So that's obviously shouldn't be the way it is, because we've got a Habsburg on the throne. The question is, should we mirror that with a French set of victory conditions? I say yes, because it creates more tension between France and Spain, where they both have a desire. It's only a 5-point bonus for getting that prestige event there. And I would say, the French were playing in this and had some sort of claim to the situation where maybe some sort of reversal could come from a prestige grant of some sort or another. I'm not sure that I can really agree that that exists, but I kind of like the effect on play, and I don't want to strip that out completely. Turkey gets 10 points if they end up controlling one of the two major Hungarian territories, which they do currently. Russia's going to get 5 points for controlling the Crimea, this space of it, which is unreadable to me. The script there, but that's a Z apparently. And that is about it for this scenario. This one goes until 31. There's special rules about the length of turns. I don't want to tinker with that. I want to keep the core game going, but I do like adding these the scenario-specific victory conditions. I think they add some framework to the game that would be missing otherwise. If you're going to play the grand campaign of this and tinker with it the way I do, you really kind of need someone to say, I'm this semi-uninterested observer running the game, making these decisions, or else really hammer out and make a new game out of it. Now, given the degree to which I think that player aids, etc., have to be added to it, it wouldn't be that unreasonable to say, I want to hammer out, these new rules. But such is life. Ours was kind of interesting this turn. It's always my favorite part, I think. We had a decreased commerce. I didn't tell you about it, but I remember to play it. The Dutch won big across the board. They were able to pay their triple even with the decreased commerce. They have nothing else to do with their money because they've built all their fleets, all their economic fleets. They had one more to play this turn. The Spanish and English could barely make their base costs, so they got no additional space on the tracks. Conceivably, the English or the Spanish could have overpaid a little bit to get a point of prestige and hurt the other. Well, only the English could have done that. They could have paid a couple extra bucks to do that. It's always an idea, and I should be contemplating it. I don't think about it. I've been doing this kind of mechanically. The high competition didn't drive the English back. And then we had the Russians spend their big $10, and they failed. So they have no shipping fleet, and they'll start over. The Swedes are getting close. I think they're at 8 right now. So a couple more turns, they get their roll on that. How much of a disadvantage is it? Well, that extra money would be useful for taxes. It would mean for a little while they could build up an extra unit, probably get the rest of their army built. But they're kind of hoping if they're going to enter into a war, they'll have some money bags behind them to help them fund it, because they really don't exist as a viable army anymore. And, well, I guess we go on to diplomacy, see if anything exciting happens. We do have a territory up for grabs. And some of the powers, not the Dutch this time, but some of the powers have miners that they could bring in. The English have Bavaria there, and Prussia, I think, has... Nope, they brought theirs in. But they get this. Their feudal unit should be on the board. Should have been there last turn. No biggie. Diplomatically, we saw the English bring Bavaria into the war. The Prussians gained Baden as a non-included ally. No one wanted to enter a new war, although the Russians were kind of considering, hey, you could go to war with Poland. Which brings up an interesting point. Poland owed $5 due in 1709. Now, the last turn was a turn which included 1709, went way through it. It seems wrong in some sort of way to penalize the Poles with a bankruptcy when they didn't actually get a turn 1709. They got a turn back in 1708, and now it's 1719. My feeling is that they have an opportunity to repay the loan, and they do so fully in this turn, paying the 5 remaining bucks to Russia, which, if you interpret it that way, is a reason why Russia wouldn't want to declare war. Russia also doesn't necessarily want to be at war with Prussia and England, although that war may be happening anyway, and this might be the opportune time to take it. All right, after the economics, I remembered to play a chip, in this case against the Dutch, and they have peasant unrest in both their territories. I may have to look up to see. There's a way of quelling that unrest by taking lower taxation, but I haven't done that yet. You can reduce the amount of unrest you have. I've forgotten about that rule and happened to notice it, but then didn't bother to read it. And now I'd have to find it again. I think I can, but I don't remember quite what it does. The Prussians building up their navy. So we have a little bit of a worry. The English didn't gather their whole navy. They've got to kind of split up. They had an admiral. They don't anymore because too much time passed. And they're not in the best of positions to face the Dutch. Now they could see, this is right against them. No, this is the Dutch sea. So they can kind of slip around, connect up with the rest of their fleet, since they get to move first and park themselves outside the Dutch harbor with a huge fleet. They may not catch the Dutch, but that's always an effect. We also have, finally, a Russian navy beginning, which I don't know how big a deal that's going to be, but there's a potentially fairly decent-sized little Dutch fleet. Not on the Spanish, French, English size, but if there's a severe war, they could be in the playing. Of course, right now they're only at 1 ship, so it's not something that's going to happen in the near future. You got Marlborough and halt in the field and ready to start fighting, and get English leaders over on the Bavarians, which will help remind me to move them maybe. With naval opposition from both Holland and Portugal, well, opposition in general, the English actually sent a force into Africa thinking they could take two colonial territories, and get control of the African trade. There's nothing else they could take that would really swing the nature of the world. They want Quebec, but they can't get that right now. They need to go to war with France for that. So they send off an invasion there. 2 units made it there. Nice play there. The Portuguese, I don't believe, are allowed to go off map. So they send one ship out here into the Mediterranean to hunt British shipping. And the rest of the Dutch fleet actually slips by the English, not a real blockade, but the English patrolling of the North Sea. And they sail out to Africa and destroy the English fleet. That's 3 prestige points off of England. It was just two squadrons, but they wiped it out completely, even though the English got the wind gauge there. Anyway, that'll put us to our land phase, and this is not going to go as well for the Dutch, I can tell. All right, as we wind up the spring turn, for the land phase, the Prussians and Brits moved forward. The Bavarians moved into the Palatinate, defeated the army that was there. It couldn't really get away. It didn't have a leader, so it couldn't withdraw. There was no successful interception, and Hall came into Zealand and succeeded in his siege in one roll. Things looking bad, but then a huge Dutch force moves in and strikes him. That could have been a big deal. Better leader means that the Prussians had a +1 on the table, but they had less troops. The difference of the tables was essentially 5-9 for the Prussians and 10 for the Dutch. Bad die roll combination for the Dutch, though. 6 for the Prussians, I think a 1 for the Dutch. Both sides had +1. The Dutch had more cav, and they succeeded in getting their value. They caused 1 hit. The Prussians caused 3, including cav. All right, this would be the point where the Dutch are actually at breaking point. They've taken 3 hits, and their army is a 2-quality army. +1 for the leader puts them to a 3. They are a broken army. Normally I would withdraw under those conditions. However, I'm playing by the rules now. I couldn't. So I had to fight another round. The Dutch take more casualties, so now they must leave, and they had a 50% chance of a full flight type of route. It's still not a guaranteed thing. That would allow, I don't remember quite what the situation is, but a more decisive route than we've seen so far didn't happen. So the Dutch got away in not too bad a shape, and they actually caused more casualties in the second round. It doesn't matter, though, because a broken army that takes any hits has to run. It's just a question of how it gets out of there. If I'm correct there, I think I am. All right. So on to the autumn, and again, the Dutch can't hold out against this. There's just too much facing them. They are going to lose the ground war. The only question is, can they do some damage like they did here? Can they keep their prestige up? And one way of keeping it up is to take a siege and just basically give up the war right away, which they might want to do, but they also kind of want to explore the opportunity of gaining some points to keep their strength kind of up there in the prestige level for this turn, and so that the surrender doesn't throw them too far down. Okay, so the English sailed out and hunted down the Dutch fleet, and they succeeded in destroying it. There is one Dutch ship left from that fleet. The Dutch have almost no naval power. That's an interesting factor in this game. So most designs tend to say, okay, we'll use all buckets of dice or all firepower tables. The fact that this game says we'll use kind of this very low-grade firepower table to handle the casualties in land combat. And it really is, with multiple rounds and everything. And then a buckets of dice, pure and simple system with higher stakes if the Brits and or Dutch are involved. Now that's kind of weird because the Brits and Dutch are just going to have a more decisive battle. That's all it really comes down to. Now they have an advantage over everyone else, but if they fight each other, whoever kind of gets the win gauge wins in a bigger way, right? It's an interesting situation. But anyway, we had not quite equally matched. The English definitely had a few more ships, but they knocked out all but one of the Dutch ships, which meant a 3-point prestige change. And then the Dutch and Portuguese allies spread out again, finding new places to do privateering. Only success was one success up here. They took out, some tobacco got stuck or something. They took out one of the English ships. Now, of course, that's rebuildable. $3 from the company treasury brings that back. No real difficulty in getting it back or whatever. That was a point which needed to be clarified. There had been some questions on that. The whole thing is, if the only way to really get rid of those merchants is to defeat them through competition. But if you knock out enough of the merchant fleet and they lose some competitions and they don't produce any money, or they don't produce enough money to meet the basic demands, they have to make a roll to see if they lose a level of structure, which is how countries like Sweden and France kind of fell apart and ended up in a position. There's two things that can happen. If you end up without a company treasury that can rebuild the ships, you're screwed. And that's one way privateering can work. But it's really, really tough to do anything to something like the Dutch shipping capability. That's going to come back no matter what. So the Dutch are under siege here. And they don't want to keep fighting the war. They're going to surrender. Remember, under the base rules, they can surrender, and there's nothing that the Alliance can do about it. As it is, I've given the Alliance the penalty, possibly, of taking 4 prestige versus 2 for the Dutch. Essentially, it's the same thing, though. There just isn't that much to gain against the Dutch, right? We've defeated their navy. That's as good as we can do there. We've taken the one area that we could take from them. Now, granted, the English kind of would like a colonial territory, but you know what? There's going to be plenty of wars against the Dutch, and we failed. We could keep the war open to try to do privateering, but that's a very limited success rate. Basically, each fleet, I'm going to cut 1/6 of the Dutch fleet down each time I do that. And if I do, the merchant fleet, they get an ability to rebuild at the same time. So it's probably going to be they'll be down a couple of ships for the entirety of the war because their company will produce enough money. Unlike France's and Sweden's, which really got hosed, their companies are going to produce enough money to be able to maintain replacement of the war losses. I can hunt down the remainder of the actual Dutch Navy, the Portuguese, and there's some Dutch ships here. Again, minimal use there. That can get me some prestige, but not a lot. It's probably best to take this win, not take a 4-point hit to my prestige, and start another war. Not next turn, but the turn after. Well, not next turn, but the turn after there's been a peace, assuming nobody else starts a war. The fact that nobody else is at war means that allowing it to go to peace is probably the best option. I don't think there's a way of catching the Dutch here. Is that fair? Is that unfair? Well, they did get off to the jump in the trade game. I didn't realize how important that would be. Nobody really tried to deal them a blow. Unfortunately, the English historically did beat the Dutch with a sheer naval strategy. Maybe they just got lucky in the competitions or something like that. I don't know. But the game does seem a little leaning towards the Dutch in the sense that they have an advantage at the beginning of the game. And they're probably going to be able to maintain that. There's no commercial stipulations you can make that reduce the size of their merchant fleet. One thing that can is states taking the exclusive option. The Dutch don't have the military power to force states to allow them in. But the only ones, the English already have it, and the Dutch are not in English ports. They can't go here, for example. Nobody can. But the opening up of the Spanish ports was a big advantage to the Dutch. Historically, that helped the English because the English were in a position not too different from how the Dutch are. So you can just look at it as, well, the Dutch came in with a good hand, as they did historically, and it was actually kind of an unlikely event that the English would supersede them. Unlike EU, there's no structural situation that makes the Dutch less able to compete on the mercantile level than they were and than any other country is. Maybe there should be, Maybe England should get an advantage eventually. I'm not sure. I don't think an England that has exclusive trade policy should, though. I actually think what there should be is if a country takes free trade, it should get some sort of advantage in the competitions. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me look that up. Hope springs eternal. No, it's just a simple division of the number of slots there are there. How many fleets are present determines who gets the profit. And, if there's a lot of exclusion, then the fleets end up piling in to ensure a greater chance of getting the profit in that spot. So it's not like the huge fleet is completely a waste, but it's not going to be the power that it is if there was less ports available. So that's kind of what maybe players need to think about, is the way to cut the Dutch out at this point is to strip some of the colonial territories from people. That actually targeting the Dutch is not going to do it. So for example, let's see, if we can grab Quebec, that cuts the Dutch out of the North American, that's the only North American ports. Any other possibilities? Spain goes exclusive. That cuts the Dutch out of a decent amount of ports. The two gold ports, the wine and the cereal here, a little bit. Other players, what do they feel? What does a Turkey feel? Turkey gets an advantage off the free trade. They would get an advantage off taxation, but they get nothing off of going exclusive. It's a hard call there. Russia, they're probably not interested in the materials that are near them, so they're not interested in being exclusive. They would rather either free trade or taxation. Free trade because of the military advantages of getting more generals, and the taxation because of, one, it cuts down the profits that other people make, and two, it gives you some extra cash in your corporate treasury. commercial phase can, sometimes it can be kind of exciting, like when there's the high competitions or when there's a big shake-up because, say, a lot of privateerings happened, say when the French were getting knocked out or the Swedes were getting knocked out of the market entirely. Well, both happened kind of at once. And then there's turns like this where really nothing happened. The English had enough money they could have built a new fleet, but instead they rebuilt one. That makes more sense than trying to roll for structure. I'm not even sure rolling for structure makes any... it matches any kind of realistic imagined situation here, since the companies are not, it's not like one ship is one company or something like this, where they'd be potentially in competition with each other. It's the overall structure of the fleet. If you're not building it up, if you're not building new ships, if you're not rebuilding the structure that you have, what does it mean that you're adding to the structure? I mean, that just is weird. Anyway, not a lot of movement anywhere, in the sense that, say, the Dutch didn't get quite enough for a high competition. Everybody paid double because it was clear that, say, Spain, who could have afforded to try to build another shipping unit, well, had they done so, they would have lost prestige, right? Because they're certain the English are going to spend double. There's just times when you can look at the money available and say, I know what's going to happen here, and if I do A, bad things happen, but if I do B, it's okay. After significant consideration, the Dutch peace, clearly accepted by the alliance. The English took Zealand. That takes away their casus belli. That's a problem. But they're hoping that they can get chits between the border casus belli and the commercial ones and such not. They think as long as Holland is so far ahead, they can leverage some sort of command of those, as they have so far. It's better than paying the high price in terms of prestige. So they took the territory. Now that takes $3 away from the Dutch and some troops. Not much. I think they have 1 or 2 units that are Zealand only. More importantly, well, that's the more important effect. It only gives the English $1 because they don't. It's not within their national territory. It's another person's national territory, so it's only worth a maximum of $1 to take that kind of territory over. It ends the war and prepares them for another. Now, everyone else, there was kind of the question of, does anyone else want war? The only person who really did is Russia, and Russia's got some problems. Turkey, always a fearful proposition going in on their own. They think they can get an Austrian alliance against Turkey to boost their own prestige. Poland, well, with Prussia and England on their side and the war ending, that seemed an iffy choice, and there isn't much to gain in Poland anymore. There's not much to gain in Turkey either. It's just a matter of getting points. But if you're not fighting battles, all you're going to get is the peace points. You kind of want to win battles. But Turkey's a weird proposition because they still have this large feudal army, which could kick sand in their face, conceivably. Sweden would be an interesting option, but it's going to be hard to bring Sweden to a war, and not just for Finland, and that they would rather get it as part of another war, they think. Their country's in good shape. They could conceivably go to war, but they also can still build up some forces, which will put them in a better position and maybe get an alliance together and a distraction war like the war against Holland, so that they can move on Turkey, because they're in a pretty good shape overall. And let's see, we're going to take these out. Trying to think if there's anything else to cope with here, but that seems to be the majority of the peace phase. So now we begin the recovery from this war. Okay, Well, that gets us to the 1721 turn. Just have to check to make sure we're not near a turn boundary. I didn't think we would be. That was in 17. That doesn't come until the 30s. I don't remember where. We could pass it. Point-wise, nothing too exciting there. Pretty much what we know. Holland and then England. And then Spain. 590, 541, 520. 510 for Prussia. Prussia's gaining some ground off these wars with Holland. There's no question of that. They're just not gaining as much. Remember, the English have the mercantile ability too, which is, I think, necessary to winning the game. I don't think you can win it without the trading company. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a coalition of powerful combat states could keep rolling over attacks. That would make for a hideously tedious game, though, where you're constantly at war. And there are some structural deficiencies that prevent that from happening. So, for example, Russia could have declared war this time. And they could have kept their points cranking. Instead, they're now down at the average of 15. It means we're going to have a big, long peace turn. Now, that would be especially bad, right? Remember, the rules themselves state that you get a multiplier times the amount of peace turns. That would really tilt the game even further in the direction it seems to be tilted, which is to say, you come on top through a war, and most specifically through trade, and you just get humongous amounts of victory points. I think it's tilted enough as it is, away from... So would people at war be able to do better? No, because they can't keep boosting... Yeah, would you be able to do better by having a war and then getting that big multiplier? No, because you don't have the ability that the mercantile powers have to keep boosting their victory point or their prestige creation. And two, eventually war is going to catch up to you, I think. No, it's not going to catch up to the English-Prussian against Holland alliance, because that's not gaining a lot. But Russia's making herself some big enemies here. She's taken things from Turkey, Poland, and Sweden. Okay, probably Russia could handle all three of them at once, but they're in the market for, hey, what can we get to help us? Austria, not much better, but maybe. But most likely we're looking at Prussia and or England and stuff like that coming in to smack down the guy who's doing too well for military endeavors. Now, are they going to be able to? Yeah, that's a good question. Will a primarily economic power such as England, with a strong military set of alliances, be able to take down a big beast like a Russia or a France that's doing well? I don't know, but that's actually... very close to what historically happened, is that you had the England-France conflict really driving this whole century. Well, we may be seeing an England-Russia conflict instead here. Except that as long as Holland is winning the game, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I don't know. Anyway, we'll see how long the peace ends up being. We don't know ahead of time. Some of the economies trying to recover a little bit here. They can only do it in general peace terms, in reality. So something like Poland, they built a couple of military units. That's not going to be enough to help them. Luckily, they have their feudal units if they do end up in a war. But they have no debt, which is kind of nice. That's the problem with countries like France, who are at the extreme bottom of the victory point list here. How do they get out of that? Do they bother? All right, let's send this up.